I'm Bridget. Welcome to episode 2 of Unflocked, where we expose the evil tactics of those who use and abuse God and His name to control, manipulate, and cause harm, and where we hope and try to point to the goodness and love of the true God and what He really stands for. I realized in watching back episode 1 that it looked like I was in a bunker. It will look like that again when I film at night. Today I'm filming with some daylight, so hopefully it's a little less ghetto. I'm okay with that because season 1 is just going to be a little rough around the edges. It's very basic. Obviously, there's no B-roll, there's nothing too fancy, no bells and whistles. The goal is eventually to flesh out a show that is a bit more engaging, a bit more like crime documentary style. But for now, I'm not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I figure it's better to get started and talk about these things with the resources I have than to wait until it's perfect. But just want to acknowledge that I am aware that the vibes are a little ghetto. That's okay. Today's drink is a Dunkin' iced coffee. I had planned to do another tonic, but I drank them all and I'm tired. So it's a iced coffee. It's from yesterday, which is why the ice is gone, but my sister got it for me. I obviously love Dunkin'. I'm from New Hampshire. I'm from outside Massachusetts. I went to high school in Massachusetts. So Dunkin' iced all year round kind of girl. I know it's objectively probably really shitty coffee, but that's okay. It is familiar and cathartic and reminds me of simpler times. Okay, so I'm just gonna jump right in. Obviously, the show is kind of a work in progress, but the goal is specifically to talk about different things happening, whether it's current events or have happened in history that point to instances of people really turning God into someone He's not and weaponizing Him for their own personal gain, their own use. And unfortunately, there is no limit to the examples of this in history and in modern times. And yeah, it's a tough thing to talk about because it does obviously start by making people who claim God look pretty bad. And there's obviously already so much of a struggle with that, with the scandal of people who've really not given God a bad, who have given God a bad name. So I recognize that this is like just an uncomfortable topic, because for a lot of people, it's triggering because they've experienced this type of abuse or this type of mistreatment at the hands of so-called Christians. And then there's probably people who are not quite where I'm at. Like, I think a podcast like this time last year would have made me uncomfortable because it would have made me listen to things and face things that did not align with the people I thought were my people, if that makes sense. So I understand, and I want to just kind of give space for that to maybe be where you're at. Not everyone is in the phase I'm in. We're all in various phases of life, and not everyone is at the point where like they see this as something very important to talk about and expose. It could be mostly just uncomfortable. And I want to talk about this. There's a lot of conversation right now about criticizing, the government of Israel and the United States involvement in that. And I've been outspoken about my criticism of not only what Israel is doing and what America is helping Israel do, but the conservative people that I've looked to in the past as the standards for truth bearing, the standards for people, coming out and defending innocence and really standing for human rights for all people, especially all innocent people. There's been silence, deafening silence. And one of the main reasons for that is, or at least one of the main excuses given for that silence has been it's anti-Semitic to critique Israel. And I've said this before online and I'll say it again. That's like saying it's anti-Catholic or anti-Christian to expose the many, 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 many sex scandals that have occurred systemically, not just like one-off creeps, but systemically organized, diabolical abuses, particularly in the Catholic Church. At least that's where I've studied it the most because I am Catholic. So I reject categorically this idea that you're like going for your own or you're unchristian if you point out evils. And it doesn't matter who's committing the evils. They need to be pointed out. They need to be exposed and brought to light because that is where truth comes to the forefront, and then we can deal with the truth. And I've seen a post about this several times. My sister pointed it out first, but one of the reasons people have just sort of moved on from the Epstein files, one of the reasons is that social media just kind of pushes you to move on to the next enraging, triggering subject of the day. But one of the reasons is because there are so many families and churches and just systems in general where they have their own version of the Epstein files. They have their own version and their own history of crimes that have been committed against innocent people, be it children or whomever. And they've kept them quiet too. And they haven't held the perpetrators accountable, and they've silenced the victims. And so this is old hat. Now, obviously, the Epstein files are at a massive level. They're at a high scale, high stakes level, impacting countless people at a geographically profound level. But it's all the same. It's human history playing out over and over and over and over again, with perpetrators hiding in plain sight, or maybe not even hiding, and innocent people paying the price. So all that to say, it is important that we talk about these things, that we continue talking about these things. At some point, I want to get to a place kind of nationally where we're doing more at an organizational level, at a grassroots level. I don't know what that looks like right now. Right now for me, it really is talking about these things and exposing them. At some point, I hope at a local level, and then expanding out beyond that, we're able to really organize in a way that's meaningful in terms of reviving truth and integrity and goodness as a people, as an American people. I do not think it will happen in the government. It's definitely not going to happen top down. We're so far beyond that, and I'm not saying we completely remove ourselves from the political process, but it is very evident that integrity is going to have to start with you and with me, and then we go from there. And I do hope at some point there is more organization surrounding, the strategy of what that looks like, if that makes sense. Bit of a tangent, but it's been on my mind, so I just wanted to say it because it's relevant. Okay, so we're going to jump in today's episode. Today's episode is about the Lafferty family. They were a Mormon family in Utah. A lot of mixed takes on Mormonism. I'm gonna keep my statements limited. I do not believe Mormonism is true Christianity. If you look at the fundamental texts and pillars of their system of beliefs, it does not ultimately point to a triune God who died a brutal death and rose from the dead in the way that is consistent with the Bible to believe. So, and they have a lot of weird shit in terms of what they think eternal life looks like. It's like a hypersexualized religion, in my opinion. I said I wasn't going to go in hard, but I just went in hard. So there it is. Hope that doesn't offend too many of you. Also, I did want to just thank everyone who watched episode 1. Way more people than I thought would watched it, which was just so exciting. And yeah, I appreciate it so much. So thank you for that. So let's talk about the Laffertys. The Laffertys were, if you've seen Under the Banner of Heaven on Hulu, it is based loosely on the Lafferty story. Has actually a lot of accuracies in it, but I know that the families of the victims felt that there were some inaccuracies. So I'm going to focus on the facts of the case rather than on the show. The show was based off of a book by the same title, Under the Banner of Heaven. I highly recommend you watch the show because it's so well made. It has Andrew Garfield in it. It's very intense. And once you hear the story, you'll see why. So if this type of story is going to keep you up at night, then maybe don't watch it. I've seen it twice now. I think the reason it resonates so much is because even though the details are very extreme and the specifics are maybe more intense than most of us have experienced in our lives in terms of what ends up unfolding, the theme is very much consistent with things I've experienced, which is, well, you'll see. Let's play it out and you'll see what I'm about to say. Okay, so we're going to start with just a kind of foundation of this patriarchal trauma that was, kind of institutional in the Lafferty family. And there is a lot of this in Christian dynamics, Mormon dynamics. There's a lot of this in religious families, frankly. And I'm at a point in my life where I'm very confused about religion in general, because I've seen so much good done by the organization of people in a religion, I've also seen catastrophic diabolical harm. And I'm at a point where I'm not entirely sure that the good outweighs the harm, if that makes sense. So we're going to jump into this. There were 6 Lafferty brothers. That was my dog. That was not my stomach, don't worry. 6 Lafferty brothers. They were raised by Watson Lafferty Sr. He was very, very strict, very domineering, physically abusive into adulthood with his children, which I'm going to say something. I have to be careful because it is specific to my life and people I know. It's not my immediate family, but it will shock you how the patriarchy, or the hierarchy, I guess I'll say hierarchy. It is usually a patriarchy, but the hierarchy of leadership in these families, and this is something I've seen in real life play out. It does continue into adulthood in terms of the oldest, the elder, having authority over anyone younger, and the authority extends far beyond what a reasonable person would say is normal. For example, I want to use specific people, but I want to be careful. So I know of a family where an adult mother with adult children of her own, was literally scolded, called and scolded by her father because she let some of her kids miss enough Latin lessons with him that he was personally put out and called her to scold her, which adults shouldn't be scolding each other, I'm not even sure we should be scolding kids, just weird. And then in that same family, uncle and aunt involvement in niece and nephews, adult niece and nephews, that extends far beyond what would be reasonable even if they were still children. There are ways I will and will not parent my nieces and nephews who are children, because you don't cross that line. Well, in certain families, and families I know of, there is crossing of lines all the time. And so long as a person is older than you and considered an elder, anything goes. You owe them a certain level of allegiance and respect and obedience no matter what they're saying. And this played out with my wedding to my husband. There was a lot of drama. We weren't going about it the way they wanted us to because we're adults and we didn't have to go about it the way they wanted us to. And I was called by an aunt, my husband was called or emailed by an uncle, and we were given conditions. Our behavior would condition whether or not they attended the wedding, which of course I was like, don't come to my wedding. I'm not playing your game. But that shit happens all the time. Okay. Lots of tangents I'm going on, but so much of this relates to my life. It's just hard not to trauma dump. Okay. 6 Lafferty brothers. They're under Watson Lafferty Sr.'s rule. He's crazy, very abusive, to the point where he wants, to teach his sons a lesson. He literally beat their family dog to death with a baseball bat, which is disgusting. Ron was the oldest. He was considered the golden boy. He was definitely closest with his mother. He was a counselor in the LDS bishopric, and he was also an athlete who had physically protected his brothers throughout his life. Then into adulthood, as Watson Lafferty, the father, is kind of trying to hand over leadership and pass off responsibility, he skips Ron. So Ron was always closest with the mother. He was the least, I don't want to say the least. He did not, just voluntarily all the time adhere to his father. So there was a lot of kickback. I'm pretty sure the reason the dog was killed by the father had something to do with Ron being disobedient. So Ron is overlooked in this pass off of the patriarchal leadership. And instead, Watson turns to Dan, who I believe is the second eldest son. I'm not 100% sure about that. So Ron originally was more mainstream, more normal, which was one of the reasons he kind of butt heads with his father a lot. He was, presumably from the outside looking in, a decent husband, a decent father. Dan, from the go, was always intellectually more radical and intense and pushing the envelope and kissing up to his father. So there was also tension between Dan and Ron because Ron's being overlooked. Dan is the second who's becoming the next leader, and he is kook. Okay? And so then there's also this like personal, and I've seen this in families a lot too. If you get skipped, if you're the eldest, and hierarchy is so important, and especially masculine hierarchy, all this stuff, if the oldest boy is getting skipped over for anybody, it's gonna cause problems because there's so much emphasis on male power. It's impossible for that person getting skipped not to feel like they are a failure, because your success as a man depends on you being powerful and dominating. Okay, I'm going to give a little background into Mormonism and what I'm going to call the Joseph Smith precedent, because one of the biggest issues we see in religious abuse is the shifting of what the truths of the religion are to fit what the person personally wants to do. We see this all the time with scripture, but in the foundings of religions, we see it all the time where people don't like, this is the whole founding of Anglicanism was that Henry wanted to get divorced and the Catholic Church wouldn't allow it. And so he was like, okay, screw it, and starts his own religion. So I'm like, how is anyone Anglican and like seriously believes they're the one true religion? That religion was founded so that a king could rationalize and excuse and justify getting a divorce. And he was horrible. He had 8 wives. This guy was an absolute piece of shit. It wasn't like he had a justified reason to get a divorce and the church was blocking it. And he ended up martyring the guy who told him, like, yeah, no, you can't do that. Joseph Smith did a lot of that, is what I'm trying to say. There was a lot of shifting religious principles to fit that which he wanted to do. In this case, marry a child bride. So, and this was a huge part of what led to the radicalization of the Lafferty brothers, was the studying of Joseph Smith's early life. It wasn't just, oh, we're Mormon, and this is how a lot of fundamentalist religions begin, is like a hyperfixation on certain things that justify the behavior that they want to commit and perpetuate. So the brothers begin studying early church history, specifically focusing on how Joseph Smith used what's called direct revelation to justify personal desires, such as taking many wives and child brides. They viewed Smith's 1843 revelation on polygamy as proof that God's law changes to suit the needs of his true prophets. So what a perfect setup, right? If you want to be an abusive, controlling piece of shit, what a perfect thing to believe in. That God is directly going to speak to those he's chosen. You obviously believe you're chosen, and he will tell you what you want to hear, which is really your own psychoses. It's not God, obviously, telling you to go marry a bunch of little girls. So these people, these men particularly, women do it too, most often it's men, decide, because there's precedent for it in their religion, they are the true prophet. Whatever they want to hear is divine revelation. Even if it's in complete contradiction to other truths they've been taught along the way, which is what Joseph Smith did. Joseph Smith starts out a monogamous guy, then decides he's horny and has freaking weird fetishes, which is tale as old as time. And then the rules change all of a sudden. And it's divinely inspired. God is telling him the rules are changing, which is so disturbing. The Laffertys latch onto this idea of direct revelation, and they are going to squeeze it for all it's worth. So they continue to grow in their radicalization, both Dan and Ron particularly. All the brothers are getting kind of weird. At least in the show, it portrays the tension between some of the less radical brothers and their wives. At least initially, it seemed like Ron and his wife had a decent relationship. Like I said, as he becomes more radicalized, his wife is more and more disturbed, obviously. And part of the radicalization, of course, is the introduction of physical abuse in the home, because they're true prophets of God, right? You watch yourself. And if they have to use physical chastisement, they will. I'm not sure if it's true, so I want to be careful not to disparage. But in the show, Dan, the brother Dan, the more radical brother, married a woman with 2 daughters already. And in the show portrays him begin to sexually abuse the daughters and tell him God said he had to do it. Don't know if that's true or not. I know that's happened in real life plenty of times, where it's this is God's will that I sexually assault a child, which is, ugh, I don't know how he hasn't come back and smited the whole world. I really don't. Oh, no, here it is. Okay, so both brothers, Dan and Ron, get excommunicated. Dan gets excommunicated in 1982 for attempting to take his 14-year-old stepdaughter as a second wife. So that was real. And then Ron, a year later, is excommunicated after embracing Dan's fundamentalism and demanding that his own wife, Diana, accept polygamy. So poor Diana, like, has a reasonably normal life for a while. I'm not sure if you can have that normal life if you are Mormon. Sorry, but anyway. So then we run into another issue. Ron's wife, Diana, leaves him. He's physically abusive to her and the children. She's scared for her life. She flees to Florida. Ron blames Brenda Lafferty. Brenda is married to the youngest Lafferty brother. She is the most independent. She was a journalist before she married into the family. She's just like the most outspoken of all the sisters-in-law. And she had supported Diana in leaving Ron. I'm not sure what that meant in the show. It portrays her like actually helping her move away. However it played out, it was clear that Brenda had had a part to play in helping her sister-in-law escape an abusive marriage, which good for her. She also was instrumental in preventing her husband, the youngest Lafferty, Alan, from kind of joining the brothers in their chaos. And their chaos culminated in, well, it didn't culminate, it culminates in horror, but they end up starting their own school, the School of the Prophets. It's where they are receiving this direct revelation, all this shit. And Brenda said hell no to Alan joining that group, which good on her. But the brothers hate her because she's a strong woman. She helped her sister-in-law escape her abusive husband, and she's in the way. She is in the way of their bologna and cheese. In early 1984, there are a couple things that happen. In March, Ron recorded a revelation claiming that God had commanded the removal of Brenda, his sister-in-law, and her daughter Erica, because they were literally described as obstacles in his path. And his path was to try to get his wife back, mainly. And there were a couple other people on the list. I believe there was another woman who had helped Diana get away. And then there was, I believe there was the LDS, one of the LDS elders or whatever they call them, who had helped, had basically spearheaded excommunicating Ron. So he wants revenge. These 4 people are on the list, including this baby. And the baby, Brenda's daughter, Brenda and Alan's daughter, who is literally Ron and Dan's niece, is dirty blood, basically. It doesn't matter that she's 15 months old. She's a problem because she comes from problematic blood. So they adopt an early Mormon doctrine of blood atonement. So this is what's so scary about these religions. There is enough in a lot of these religions that psychopaths can pull from to justify what they do. Now, I'm not saying they should be doing that or that's an excuse. Absolutely not. But I mean, blood atonement is a crazy fucking thing. So it's literally believing that because Brenda was apostate and insubservient, her sins could only be purged by spilling her blood. So they twist this so much that it comes across like they are doing the victim a favor. And I've seen this in real life. I have seen people abuse. I'll leave it at that. It's not my story to tell. And then when confronted about the abuse, literally say, I was refining the victim. That this was God's will because in my love for this person, I had to break them down, which is just like, what the hell? Okay, Phil's calling me. I'm going to tell him that I'm busy. And he sent me pictures of the dogs. Very sweet. All right. Now, to the brothers, Brenda's sins were that she was not subservient enough, which is diabolical. She had a university education, and she had been a professional woman before that, and she was vocal about her beliefs, and she was vocal about her opposition to what was going on with the brothers. because she's brave. And it was very clearly, it didn't take anyone terribly smart to see that what they were doing was getting increasingly scary and abusive and wrong, and obviously misled. She also refused to acknowledge Ron's authority, which he didn't really have. All of this culminates in the crime, which is really, really sad. And it is portrayed in the show in a way that doesn't like ruin your life, but it is disturbing. So I will say that if you watch Under the Banner of Heaven, it is tough. It's a tough scene. Andrew Garfield does such a good job, though, of just the emotions. And it's really cool because in the show, Andrew Garfield, and I'm not sure if this is true, but it probably is a Mormon detective, and he like becomes increasingly less whatever the opposite of radical. Like he becomes more and more like just questioning everything because of the way this crime takes place. So on July 24th, 1984, it's Pioneer Day. Pioneer Day is it's like an important holiday in Mormonism. It was chosen as a day to signal that the true pioneers were reclaiming the faith from a corrupt modern church. The brothers, throughout the day, the brothers claim to be in a state of constant prayer. They said they prayed over everything, including which way to turn the car, believing that they were being led by the Spirit to carry out these killings, these atonement killings. So they break into Brenda's home. Ron beats Brenda. He strangles her with a vacuum cord, and then he slits her throat. And then Dan goes into Erica's crib. She is 15 months old, his 15-month-old niece, and he slits her throat. So both of them are murdered. They later claim they felt no remorse because they were acting as the arm of God. It like gives me goosebumps. It's so disgusting. They are obviously later convicted. Dan is convicted in 85. He was sentenced to life. He is still in jail. He's completely unrepentant. He believes he is the biblical prophet Elijah. The blasphemy. Like, I don't know how I just don't know how God does it. I don't know how he sits up there. I'm not saying he sits up there passively, but how he allows history, which is really just the telling of the story of free will and what you choose to do with it. It's just like so bad sometimes. I'm not sure how. I couldn't do it. If someone was using me as their excuse to be as horrible, I would fucking lose my shit. Ron Lafferty, for his crimes, which I'm not sure why Dan got a lesser sentence, but Ron was sentenced to death. He spent 34 years trying to appeal his sentence, and he eventually died on death row in 2019 of natural causes. The case remains a stark warning of how still small voice of personal revelation can be distorted into a justification for domestic violence and murder. Sorry, I have like snot in my throat. Excuse me. It's disgusting. Okay. So, a lot to unpack here, obviously. I'm using this story for multiple reasons. The main reason is because, like I mentioned earlier, the brothers used many, not one, many precedents, for lack of a better word, from Mormon history, from their founding, the religious founding, from their own texts to come up with this plan and to radicalize the way they did. Again, not an excuse, but because there are these tenets of this religion that are incredibly questionable, including the fact that their founder was a creep. That's not a secret. Like, this guy had issues. It allows or enables and it helps prop the delusions and insecurities and mental illnesses of people like the Lafferty brothers. Again, this case is an extreme culmination of that form of radicalization, but the themes are prevalent everywhere. And I have seen it time and time and time again in the circles I run in Mormon circles, in Christian conservative Catholic circles. I was watching Beast Games season 1, and I don't know if he's a pastor, but there's this guy with the long beard who instantaneously, I was like, I don't fucking like this guy. He's praying over people. He's using charisma, all this shit. And he's one of 4 people who has to decide whether or not to take $1 million or send their whole team home. And all 4 of them turned down the $1 million to save their teams, which is wild. I'm not sure I could do that. And then rides the wave of the heroism of his choice, because these people feel indebted to him, and continues throughout the show to use prayer, to use God to spiritually manipulate and bamboozle. I mean, at one point he gets like coins. There's like you have to be able to get a certain amount of coins in order to move forward with this advantage. And he finds a way to get these from pretty much everyone. And there are people praying, and one girl goes, I'm not praying for myself, I'm praying for him, because he has to choose who's going to go with him on this helicopter. Of course, he doesn't choose her. So listen to what this guy does. He has to choose 5 people, okay, to go on this helicopter with him. He is promised, while he's getting coins from people and bamboozling them for coins, that he is going to bring women. He's not only going to pick men. This fucker, before he picks anybody, gets down on a knee, prays, please Jesus, blah, 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 picks 2 guys, and then tells them they can pick who they want to pick. So then they each pick a guy, and then at the very end, he picks 1 girl. He can pick whoever he wants. But don't bring God into this. Do not act, because it's so damn manipulative. And it happens later on the show that these 2 guys deciding who should go into this competition. Whatever team loses, everybody goes home. And there's one guy who's clearly more cut out for the job, but the other guy wants to do it. And so the other guy who wants to do it and take this position from this more qualified individual starts praying. And it immediately disarms the more qualified guy. And he kind of backs off. Because of course he does. If he was raised in a system that is at all Christian or focused on prayer, you're not going to challenge the person who's basically telling you they are divinely inspired to take your spot. And of course the guy sucked and lost, and the whole team got sent home, and the more qualified guy was like, I should have been more assertive. And it's like, yeah, you should have. But that tactic is powerful. That tactic is very powerful, of asserting divine authority. And this has been used to abuse, to silence forever. And we will do a whole episode on the church, the sex scandals in the church. I'll probably do one on the Pennsylvania report specifically, because it's the one I've read the most in depth in. I think people picture abuse as being very like random, and somebody had a bad day and he has a purity issue. The strategy and the calculation that went into, in the case of what I'm talking about, the sex scandals of, priests abusing children, it was very strategic. Like they being the circle of abusers and their enablers, had a system for who they would target. They would give them they would give these children a particular cross necklace, so that all the other abusive priests in the diocese knew who the targets were. They knew who had already been spiritually and sexually abused by priests, therefore were more susceptible. And that was part of their way of targeting these kids. And it wasn't just that they said, hey kid, come to the sacristy and whatever. It was deeply, deeply, deeply spiritually abusive. I'm going to just say it. There were situations where the priest would be sexually abusing these children and have them with their arms out like they were on the cross. The Eucharist was brought into this abuse at times. Diabolical. Because you have taught these people, you've taught these children especially from the beginning, that priests have authority, that they represent God on earth, and same with prophets and elders and all this shit. The people in positions of authority in religions are ordained and anointed. And then you get a sicko of which there are unfortunately many, 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 and even if they're not sickos, human weakness is a very critical component of whether or not you are a good church leader or a really bad one. You get those who are particularly debaucherous. Game over. It is the most powerful way to manipulate and abuse a person and get them to do what you want, to bring God into it, to bring the state of their soul into it. We see this all the time now. It's my biggest critique of the way the MAGA movement and the conservative movement and the TPUSA movement has devolved, because it has made it so that anyone who dares say, I don't believe you. I mean, that's all you have to say is, I don't think that's what's happened. And obviously Candace has gone hard in the paint in terms of what she is trying to figure out about Charlie's death. She has proven to be on the right track. I don't even watch her, but it's like, if you look at the way the other side is handling things and the way TPUSA and Erica have handled things, and then you look at the questions Candace is asking, logic aligns with Candace. But they will all these people say you are anti-Semitic if you criticize Israel. You are anti-Christian if you question that a widow is genuine in her mourning. By the way, crime 101 is you question the fucking widow and the widower. That's those are the first people you look at, even if they don't have something to gain. But you look for who is closest to the victim, what motives do they have, what have they gained or could they gain. And you look at someone like Eric Kirk, this is a huge tangent, obviously. Lot to gain. My point in all of that is to say, no more powerful a way to alienate and ostracize and damn, for lack of a better word, anyone who's stepping out of line than to pick them off one by one and to do it in a way that spiritually attacks them. Because you may not get them to come back. Sometimes you will. Sometimes people just say, I can't stand it. And they do. They crumble. I've seen it. But more powerful than that is, what's the best way for Dan to keep his wife in line? To take out the wives who aren't cooperating. And it works. It works to keep people's butts in the pews, because they don't want to be alienated spiritually. They don't want to be damned. They have been raised from the moment they first were being spoken to believe that obedience and adherence is the path to righteousness. So, scary shit. I'm gonna wrap it up here, I think. Yeah, there's more to be said, but we'll just kind of leave it here for episode 2. I'm so grateful for everybody watching at home, or wherever you're watching it. And yeah, I'm grateful. Also, I know that the first episode came out Friday. This one is a Sunday. I'm aiming for like one a week, but it's gonna be a little random. Again, eventually I plan to have a producer, I plan to have a scheduler, I plan to have an editor. There's going to be a more of a system. For now, I think it's just important to get a groove and to be talking about these things. And I have to do that within my very limited technical skill set. So here we are. All right. God bless you guys. Thanks for watching.